Hi Anna, this is my first time trying a video journal, and I can't remember if we discussed it in section how long they're supposed to be, and I couldn't find it in the syllabus, so if it gets too long, just, I guess, stop watching. I might jump around a little bit between ideas, between the reading and lecture, um, but I think I'll start with the readings. I thought it was really interesting how they talked about breaking discipline with the environmental humanities and like coming out of fields that like have more governmental gain or like economic gain, like the passage on environmental economics and psychology, and how that like narrows the humanities ideas of, I think the quote was human agency, social and cultural formation, social change, and then the entangled relations between human and non-human worlds. um, because when I first got into this program from like an English and music degree and starting to go into what the environmental humanities was versus like the social sciences, I was primarily finding like environmental econ stuff and like very large quantitative surveys of like how you find meaning in the environment, just like Likert scale type things, um, or Likert, sorry. And then I was finding the psychology ones, um, which were also interesting, but I think I could see how the humanities was missing from them. And because I thought that was the only thing out there, I had thought I wanted to do something with psych and the environment and like how people find meaning through that. Um, I was actually trying to use like implicit association testing originally, but then I brought it to my advisor and she's like, no, you're not, like, you're a humanities person. Um, yeah, so psychology is an interesting part of it that I hope to incorporate at some point, but I think it's interesting that the Rose reading kind of acknowledged how it narrows those ideas, um, because I wasn't getting the like multi-species ethics part of it from the psych field, but then I found it in the humanities field. Um, so a lot of the people mentioned in the Rose reading actually like directly informed my proposal for my project. And I was reading a lot of them last year, like Dipesh Chakrabarty. I read a lot of, and I thought in this reading that placing human freedom under the cloud of the Anthropocene is really interesting. Because I also took a political ecology class last semester, and we talked a lot about what freedom and agency can look like under these like human and non-human systems. Um, but yeah, and I was laughing when you said Foucault because that was another person that came up in the political ecology class that kind of made me think about biopower versus sovereign power, and how that like influenced multi-species communities and wildlife care centers at all. Um, and yeah, he was tough to get through. So I'm glad you brought him up. Um, yeah, and then also Val Plumwood, I was really excited to see in the reading, because I just signed up to do a Chase certificate, um, about ecofeminism in the arts, because it's a little bit different than what I do with multi-species ethics stuff. Um, but yeah, so I know Val Plumwood is like definitely an ecofeminist, and that's how I kind of got into that in the first place. Um, but that definitely has a place in how I think and like about humans and non-humans and ethics of care with that. Um, but yeah, the other folks, Dominique Listel and Anna Singh, I've definitely quoted them in my proposal as well. Um, just yeah, they provided a big foundation for like my jumping off point in like the multi-species ethnography and ethology. Um, yeah, kind of drawing from anthropology fields as well. Um, yeah, but I liked what they were saying about responsibility in multi-species communities. I know Plumwood talks a lot about that, but um, Anna Singh does as well. Like, what is the human's responsibility to the non-human in groups and like communities? Um, yeah, and then my research comes from like trying to understand where your personal ethic of care comes from. Yeah, so like if it comes from education, if it comes from like a religious source, but how that ethic of care informs how you carry out that responsibility in practice. um, so I hope to find some useful information in these wildlife care centers about that. um, which led me to think about a point you mentioned about problematizing fieldwork. I talked with my advisor about this already, and it is a problem. It's a challenge that I'm facing right now as to how to compensate them. Um, yeah, and like how to not make it be like an extractive practice or an extractive method, but still wanting to be able to interview and spend time in participant observation, because that's how I'll get the multi-species component, by like observing the animals. Um, so yeah, I'd love to hear more about that from you. Um, yeah, I think multi-species ethoethnography, like Lestelle was talking about, was also hard to get into because of all the humanities jargon and the jargon coming from like conservation biology and other more scientific fields. So that's another challenge with interdisciplinarity that I've noticed as I've kind of started this program. Um, yeah, now I understand the jargon, but my next problem is knowing how to translate it to those who ask what I do. I feel like that's common across humanities fields. Like when I was doing music research, it was the same. Um, but yeah, if you had any advice on that, I'd appreciate it. Um, what else? Oh, I think the boundary trouble. I mentioned this after class, but I think the boundary trouble that we discussed was really interesting. Um, we were talking about boundaries. I teach the 113 environmental humanities class. I'm a TA for that. And we were discussing about like built environment versus natural environment, um, kind of the boundaries between those, and if it's even necessary to have that boundary. Um, so yeah, I'd be curious to hear your thoughts on that, like as with an architecture background. Um, but yeah, with the boundary question, I liked what the reading said about bringing scholarship into conversation with each other. Um, and because it kind of avoids the disciplinary label at all. Like, I don't think it matters if it has to be antidisciplinary, transdisciplinary, or its own discipline. I think, I don't think it's a discipline. I think yet it might become one, but again, with everything we discussed in class, I think it's more of an anti-discipline, breaking those like academic molds through storytelling. Um, yeah, I've always called it like a transdisciplinary area of study. Um, but yeah, I'm curious to kind of think about that this semester with how I want to label environmental humanities. So, yeah, sorry this is a bit long, but I hope you enjoyed listening. See you next week.